I still tell this story wrong sometimes. Not on purpose. It's just that when something happens fast, your memory grabs the pieces in the wrong order. You remember the smell before the sound. You remember a stranger's face before you remember your own name. So if I jumble it a little, forgive me. I was there. I saw it. And I've never stopped seeing it. Let me start where it actually started. Not with the bomb, with the boy. It was a Tuesday in late June, the kind of London morning that can't decide what it wants to be. The sky was that flat pale gray that tourists hate and locals don't even notice anymore. Warm enough that you took your jacket off. Cool enough that you carried it anyway. I had a camera around my neck, an old film one, because I'm stubborn, and a coffee going lukewarm in my other hand. I'm a photographer, freelance mostly. I shoot weddings to pay rent and I shoot the city for myself. That morning I'd gone down to the gates of Buckingham Palace because a magazine wanted something honest about the changing of the guard, not the postcard shot, something with a little life in it. So I was standing near the railings, around 10:30, just watching the crowd build. And what a crowd! You forget until you're in it how many people come to see those men in red. There were maybe 400 bodies pressed up against the black iron fence and more arriving every minute. Phones up everywhere. A river of selfie sticks. A school group in matching yellow caps that their poor teacher kept counting, again and again, like she didn't trust the number. 2 American couples comparing sunburns. A man selling little plastic guardsmen out of a suitcase. The kind of thing nobody needs and everybody buys. The air smelled like hot tarmac and somebody's vanilla ice cream, and the faint diesel of the buses crawling past on the road behind us. And then there were the guards. I want to tell you about the guards properly because most people don't really look at them. They look at them, sure, they take the photo, but they don't see them. These are the King's Guard, real soldiers, not actors, not statues, not part of the ride at some theme park. The man I ended up watching that morning stood at his post by the forecourt in the full kit, the scarlet tunic, the gleaming buttons, the black bearskin cap that sits so heavy it gives them headaches by the end of a shift. A rifle held just so, boots you could shave in. And the stillness, God, the stillness. I've photographed monks. I've photographed snipers on a magazine assignment once. Nobody holds still like a King's Guard. He stood there while the whole circus of the world swirled around him, and he did not move. Not a finger. Not an eyelash that I could see. A pigeon landed near his boot and he didn't even flinch. People tried, of course. People always try. A teenager pulled a face at him. 2 girls stood beside him pretending to lick his ear for a photo. A man in a football shirt waved a hand in front of his eyes and shouted, "Oi, you alive in there, mate?" Nothing, stone. The guard just stared past all of them at something none of us could see. I lifted my camera and got a frame of him with the man waving in front of his face, because that contrast, the chaos and the calm, that was the honest shot the magazine wanted. Click. I remember being pleased with it. If only I'd known what that same man's face would look like an hour later, I'd have kept the camera up the whole time. But I didn't know. None of us knew. That's the thing about ordinary mornings. You don't get a warning. So I lowered the camera, and I went looking for the next picture, and the next picture found me first. It was the boy. He came in from the left, near the corner of the gates, and the first thing I noticed was that he didn't belong to the crowd. The crowd was loose and loud and slow. This little family moved like they had somewhere to be. There was a woman, tall, beautiful in a careful way, the kind of careful that costs money, in a pale blue coat that was far too elegant for a Tuesday by the railings. There was an older man in a dark suit walking half a step behind her, scanning, always scanning, the way men do when scanning is their actual job. And between them, holding the woman's hand, was the boy. He couldn't have been more than 6, maybe 7, small for it anyway. He had a head of soft brown curls and a little navy coat with a gold button at the throat, and proper little leather shoes that you just knew he'd been told twice not to scuff. And here's the detail I keep coming back to. He was carrying a toy. A small wooden soldier. A guardsman, of course, the red coat, the black hat, the same as the real ones. Somebody had bought it for him, or he'd brought it from home, I don't know. But he held it up the whole time, this tiny version, comparing it to the giant real ones beyond the fence, his mouth open in pure delight. I didn't know who he was, not then. I clocked the suit, the careful coat, the way the man behind them held one hand near his own jacket, and I thought, somebody important. You learn to spot it in London, but I genuinely didn't know. I found out later, I'll get to that. For now he was just a small boy who loved the soldiers. I drifted closer. Photographers do that. We're like cats, we move toward the warm thing without deciding to. I framed him through the railings with the guard standing tall behind, the little wooden soldier held up next to the real one, and oh, it was a beautiful shot. The kind of picture that pays your rent for a month. Click. I had it. The boy tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed, and said something I couldn't hear, and she leaned down and laughed and pointed back. And for a second it was just a mum and her boy and a sunny-ish morning, and a thing he thought was the most magnificent thing he'd ever seen. Then it went wrong the way these things do, small first. There was a noise from the crowd to my right, a swell of it. Someone had started pushing, you know how it goes. One big group decides they all need to be at the front at the same moment, and suddenly the whole pack lurches like water in a tipped bucket. The school group in yellow caps got swept sideways. The ice cream man stumbled. The man with the suitcase of plastic guardsmen swore as half of them spilled onto the pavement. And the boy, the little prince with his wooden soldier, got jostled. It wasn't violent. Nobody meant it. But he was small, and the crowd was big, and a man's elbow caught him on the side of the head, not hard, but enough, and he sat down on the pavement with a bump. And the toy went flying. I watched it go. It seemed to happen so slowly. The little wooden soldier left his hand and turned over once in the air and dropped down through a gap, and rolled of all the directions in the world it could have gone under the railings, onto the forecourt, the forbidden side, the side where you do not go. It came to rest maybe 10 feet inside the gate, lying on its back, that painted little face staring up at the gray sky. And the boy started to cry. Now, I've heard a lot of children cry. Weddings are basically a buffet of crying children. But there's a difference between the tired tantrum cry and the cry of a small person whose heart has just genuinely broken, and this was the second one. He didn't scream. That's what got me. He just sat there on the cold pavement with his face crumpling, big silent tears, reaching one little hand through the bars toward the soldier he could see but couldn't touch. His mother dropped to her knees beside him instantly, that pale coat be damned, gathering him up, saying something soft into his curls. The man in the suit crouched too, his eyes still doing that scan, but softer now, worried in a human way for half a second. And the boy kept reaching through the bars and saying, over and over, a word I could just about hear now that the crowd noise had settled. Soldier, soldier, my soldier. The mother looked through the railings at the toy lying out there on the empty stone, so close, so impossibly far, and you could see her doing the maths. There is no way in this universe I am allowed to climb over the gates of Buckingham Palace to fetch a toy. There were police nearby. There were cameras everywhere. There were rules built on top of rules. She couldn't go and get it. Nobody could. She tried to tell him that gently. He wasn't having it. He was 6. The whole structure of the British state meant nothing to him next to the fact that his soldier was lying alone on the cold ground, and somebody had to save it. I had my camera up, of course I did. That's the awful honesty of my trade. The worse it gets, the more we shoot. And I was framing the boy's hand reaching through the bars, and I remember thinking, this is the saddest beautiful thing I've seen all year. And then I noticed something that made me lower the camera. The guard had moved. I want to be careful here, because this is the part people don't believe, and I understand why. These men do not move. It's not a suggestion, it's their entire identity. They've stood at their posts through tourists and tantrums and people screaming abuse at them and worse. There are videos of guards holding perfectly still while people are downright cruel to them. They are trained, drilled, hammered to remain absolutely fixed unless given an order or unless there is a real and present need to act. So when I tell you that the guard turned his head, just slightly, just enough, and looked down at that crying boy and that little wooden soldier lying on his forecourt, I know how it sounds. But I saw it. So did the woman beside me, a German tourist who grabbed my arm and whispered, did the guard just look? He did. It was the smallest thing, a turn of maybe 20 degrees. His eyes, and I was close enough now to see his eyes, gray-blue, tired around the edges. A young man's eyes found the boy on the pavement. And something crossed his face. Not a smile. Nothing so loose as that, but something. A flicker. A decision being weighed behind a face that had been trained for years not to show that any weighing was happening at all. Then he faced front again, stone again, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined the whole thing. The boy kept crying. The mother kept soothing. The crowd, which had caused the whole mess, had already moved on to the next photo, the next distraction, the way crowds do. Most of them never even saw the soldier fall. I lifted my camera again because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I got the boy's face, the wet cheeks, the little fist around one of the iron bars. And that's when I heard it. The first one was so far off I almost didn't register it as a sound at all, more like a pressure, a thing you feel in your chest before your ears catch up. A low, flat whump from somewhere to the north and east, over toward the park. A few heads turned. People do that, a strange noise. Everyone turns the same way for a second like a field of sunflowers. Then they decide it was nothing and turn back. Fireworks maybe. A lorry dropping something. London makes 1,000 noises. You learn to ignore them. I almost ignored it too. But the guard didn't. I was watching him. I'd kept half an eye on him since the head turned, fascinated, the way you watch a frozen pond wondering if it'll crack, and the instant that sound rolled across the rooftops, something changed in him. Not his body. His body stayed locked, but his eyes moved, sharp, fast, toward the north, toward the park. He knew, before any of us understood a thing, that man knew. The German woman beside me said, "What was that?" in a small voice, and I said, "Probably nothing, because that's what you say," and I didn't believe it even as it left my mouth. Then came the second sound. This one you couldn't mistake for anything. This one wasn't a pressure or a far-off whump. This one was an explosion, a real one, hard and close enough that the railings rang like a struck bell, and I felt it come up through the soles of my shoes. A column of dark smoke punched up into that flat gray sky over the trees in the direction of Hyde Park, maybe half a mile off, maybe less, and a flock of pigeons burst off the rooftops all at once like the whole city had flinched. And then the screaming started. Not at the explosion site, we were too far for that. The screaming started right there in our crowd, 400 people who'd been taking selfies 1 second and were now a panicking herd the next. Somebody shouted bomb. Somebody always shouts the worst word, and once it's out, it spreads faster than any fire. The whole crowd convulsed. People turned to run and didn't know which way. The school group in yellow caps scattered like spilled marbles, and that poor teacher's voice went up into a register I'll never forget, screaming names, just names, over and over. People shoved. People fell. A pram went over, empty, thank God. The baby was in someone's arms, but the metal frame of it clattered across the pavement and got kicked under running feet. My coffee was gone, knocked from my hand. I don't even remember it leaving. Somebody's elbow caught me in the ribs and I went down on one knee and came up again with my camera somehow still around my neck, gripping it like it could save me. It was chaos. Pure, animal, every person for themselves chaos. The kind you've seen on the news and prayed you'd never stand inside of. And in the middle of it, I lost them for a second, the family, in the surge. And then I found them again, and my stomach dropped right out of me. They were trapped. The man in the suit had thrown himself in front of the woman and the boy, arms out, trying to make a wall of his own body. But the crowd was a tide, and a tide doesn't care about one man's arms. They'd been pushed back against the railings, pinned there, the woman with the boy crushed half behind her, and people were stampeding past them in both directions at once, slamming into them. And the boy, that little boy with the wet face who just wanted his soldier, was being pressed against the iron bars by the weight of a city losing its mind. The man in the suit was shouting into a phone or a radio. I couldn't tell which, his calm shattered now, his face white. The woman had both arms wrapped around her son and her own body curled over him like a shell, taking the blows of the crowd on her back, and she was screaming for help, screaming in a way that cut straight through all the other screaming, the specific terrible pitch of a mother who can feel her child being crushed and cannot stop it. I started toward them. I want that on the record for whatever it's worth. I tried. I shoved against the flow, got maybe 2 steps, and a wall of bodies hit me and threw me back against the railings 4 feet from where I'd started. I couldn't reach them. Nobody could reach them. The crowd was the danger now, more than the smoke over the park, more than whatever had gone bang. The crowd was going to crush that family flat against the gates of Buckingham Palace, and there was not one single thing any of us could do about it. And I looked, I don't know why I looked, instinct maybe, I looked at the guard. He was still at his post. In the middle of all of it, with the whole world coming apart, with smoke in the sky and 400 people screaming and a bomb gone off half a mile away, and every reason in the world to break and run or duck or do anything a normal human animal would do. He had not moved. He stood there at attention, rifle in his hands, bearskin straight, scarlet tunic bright as a wound against the gray, the one fixed point in a spinning world. While everyone else became a stampede, he stayed a soldier. I remember thinking, in a strange detached corner of my panicking brain, that is the bravest and the maddest thing I have ever seen. But his eyes were moving. I was close enough even then, even through all of it, to see his eyes, and they were locked on the family pinned against the bars, on the woman curled over her son, on the boy. I saw him look at the boy. I saw his jaw tighten. I saw, and I will swear to this until the day I die, I saw the exact moment a man decided that some posts are worth more than the standing of them. The crowd surged again. The woman's scream cracked and went hoarse. The little boy's hand slipped off the railing. And the guard moved, the guard moved. I keep using that word moved because it's the only one I've got, but it doesn't do the thing justice. You have to understand what it means for one of those men to break his stance. It's not like you or me deciding to cross the road. It's a thing that has been trained out of him with 1,000 hours of drill. Every cell in that man's body had been taught to stay, and he overrode all of it in the space of a single breath. He didn't run at first. That's what people get wrong when I tell it. They picture him sprinting, arms pumping. No. The first thing he did was turn, a hard, clean military pivot, boots cracking on the stone, and then he came forward off his post in this fast, controlled march, the rifle up across his chest, his eyes never once leaving that family crushed against the bars. A police officer near the gate saw it and shouted something at him. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the guard's mouth move, just once, and whatever he said made the officer step back instead of stepping in his way. And then he was at the railings. From the inside, the forbidden side, 10 feet of empty forecourt and a 6-year-old's wooden soldier lying on it, and now a man in a scarlet tunic standing over the whole scene. Separated from the crushing crowd by nothing but the same iron bars the boy had been reaching through. The mother saw him. Through her own hair, through the chaos, through the weight of bodies pressing her flat, she looked up and saw a king's guard standing right there on the other side of the fence, and I watched something happen in her face that I can only call hope, the raw and desperate kind, the kind that has stopped being polite. "Please," she said. I read it off her lips more than heard it. "Please, my son, please." The guard didn't answer her. There wasn't time, and anyway I don't think he trusted his own voice. But he did something then that I have replayed in my head more times than any photograph I've ever taken. He looked at the crowd, really looked at it, read it the way a soldier reads ground, and I saw him understand in about half a second the thing the rest of us were too panicked to work out, that the danger wasn't the smoke over the park anymore. The bomb had already done its work half a mile away. The danger here was the 400 people. It was the stampede. It was the simple, stupid, lethal physics of too many frightened animals trying to occupy the same space. You can't fight a stampede with your hands. You can't reason with it. You can't even shout it down. It can't hear you. It has no ears. A panicking crowd is deaf. There's only one thing a crowd like that responds to. A bigger fear. A louder one. A single sound so sharp and so total that it cuts through the noise and slaps every brain back into thinking instead of fleeing. And the guard had one of those in his hands. I saw him bring the rifle up, and for one horrible second, I'll be honest with you because I promised I would, for 1 second I didn't understand and a cold thought went through me. He's going to, and I couldn't even finish it. People around me saw it too. Someone screamed gun, which is the second worst word, and it made the panic spike even higher. But the guard wasn't aiming at anyone. He turned, angled the rifle up and away, the muzzle pointed high over the empty forecourt, up toward that flat gray sky and nothing else, up where a sound could go and hurt no one. He planted his feet, he braced, and he fired. I've heard gunfire before, on ranges with ear defenders at a polite distance. I had never heard it like that, bare in the open in a stone courtyard that threw the sound back at us doubled and tripled. It was enormous. It was a wall. It came down on that crowd like a physical thing, like the sky itself had cracked in half right over our heads, and for 1 full second, everything stopped. I cannot describe to you what that silence was like. 400 screaming people went dead quiet in an instant. The stampede froze. Every single face turned toward the sound, toward the man in red standing at the railings with the rifle up and a thread of smoke curling off the muzzle, and the running just stopped. Hundreds of people stood stock still, hearts pounding, staring at the guard, waiting, the way you wait when something has happened that's so loud and so absolute that your animal brain hands the controls back to your thinking one and says, "Here, you deal with this." And in that second of silence, the guard used the only thing he'd bought with that shot. He used his voice. I'd never heard a king's guard speak. I don't think most people ever do. But this one filled that frozen courtyard with a voice that came from somewhere down in his boots, a parade ground voice built to carry over 1,000 men, and what he shouted wasn't fancy and it wasn't a speech. It was 3 words, 3 times, hard and flat and certain. Back away now. And then into the silence, lower but somehow louder for it. There is no threat here. Move back slowly, give them room. Move back. And the strangest thing happened. The crowd obeyed. Not all at once, not neatly, but the shot had broken the spell, and the voice gave them something to do instead of run, and a frightened crowd will take an order from anyone who sounds like they know what they're doing far more readily than it'll think for itself. The press of bodies against the railings eased. People shuffled backward, hands up, eyes wide, the herd reorganizing itself around a single calm point of authority in a scarlet coat. And the pressure came off the family. I saw the man in the suit gasp like a swimmer breaking the surface. I saw the mother's curled over back uncurl just slightly as the crushing weight lifted. And I saw God, I see it now, I saw the little boy take a huge shuddering breath of air that he'd been half crushed out of, his face red and streaked and terrified, alive, alive. The guard wasn't finished. He turned to the police officer who'd stepped back before, and now he was barking orders short, clipped, useless to repeat exactly because half of it was procedure I didn't understand but the gist of it I could follow. Open the side gate. Get these 3 inside the line. Hold the crowd at the bollards. Get me eyes on the park. The officer, who a minute ago had been about to stop this man, was now nodding and moving, because the guard had become the still point that everyone was orbiting, and nobody questions the still point in a storm. 2 more police came running. Then a third. The guard pointed, directed, placed them like chess pieces, and within maybe 20 seconds there was a cordon, a human wall between the crowd and the railings, and the worst of the crush was over. But the boy was still on the wrong side of the bars. And here's where the story does the thing that nobody believes, and I don't blame them, but I was there. The mother, half collapsed with relief, looked at the guard through the railings and she said, and now I could hear her, because the courtyard had gone quiet enough, she said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, oh God, thank you." And the boy, that little boy in the middle of all of it, with smoke still hanging over the park, and his mother weeping, and 400 strangers standing frozen, and a man with a rifle 10 feet away. The boy wasn't looking at any of that. He was looking at his soldier. Still lying there, on the forecourt, on the wrong side. That little painted wooden guardsman flat on its back on the cold stone, 10 feet inside the gate, the whole reason he'd been crying in the first place, 100 years ago, before the world ended. He pointed at it with one small shaking hand and he said, in a tiny wrecked voice, "My soldier fell down." And I watched the king's guard, this man who had just broken every rule of his post, fired his weapon to stop a stampede, organized a police cordon, and quite possibly saved that family's lives. I watched him hear those 4 words. My soldier fell down. He went still again, a different kind of still, and then he did the thing. He shouldered his rifle. He walked calm, unhurried, 10 feet across that empty, forbidden forecourt, and he bent down, this towering figure in scarlet and black. He bent right down to the cold stone, and he picked up a 6-year-old's wooden toy. He stood it up first. I saw him do that. He stood the little soldier up on his palm, set it right, the way you'd set right something that mattered. And then he turned and walked back to the railings, and he crouched down low so he was level with the boy on the other side of the bars, the great bearskin cap tipping forward, and he held the wooden soldier out through the gap. "Soldiers don't stay down," he said, quiet, just for the boy, but I was close enough. "We get back up every time." And the boy took his soldier back. His little fingers closed around it, and he pulled it through the bars and clutched it to his chest with both arms, and he stopped crying. Just like that. The way only a small child can stop, total storm to total calm in a single breath. He looked at the guard through the railings with his red, wet eyes, this enormous man in red who just handed him back the most important thing in the universe, and he did something that broke the whole courtyard's heart at once. He saluted. A wobbly, wrong-handed, 6-year-old salute, his little wooden soldier still clutched in the saluting hand, so the toy ended up bonking him on the forehead. But a salute, the realest salute anyone has ever given. And the guard, who is not allowed to react, who is trained from his first day never to react, the guard straightened up to his full height, snapped his heels together, brought his own hand up sharp and perfect, and saluted that little boy back. I had my camera up. I don't even remember lifting it, but I got it. The guard at full height, hand to his brow. The boy on the other side of the bars, soldier clutched, hand at his own forehead. The 2 of them, one enormous and one tiny, separated by iron, saluting each other in the middle of the worst morning London had seen in years. That photograph is the reason you've probably heard some version of this story. But the photograph leaves so much out. It doesn't have the smoke. It doesn't have the sound of the shot still ringing in everyone's ears. It doesn't have the mother sinking to her knees with her hand pressed over her mouth. It doesn't have the silence. Because there was a silence after that salute. The whole frozen crowd had watched it. Every one of those 400 people, who'd been a stampede 90 seconds earlier, now stood dead still and watched a guard hand a crying child his toy back through the bars of Buckingham Palace. And for a moment, nobody made a sound at all. And then somebody started clapping. I don't know who. One person. Then another. And then it spread the way the panic had spread, but backward into something good, and the whole crowd was applauding. Hundreds of people clapping and some of them crying. The German woman next to me sobbing openly now, gripping my arm, saying, "He went back for the toy, he went back for the toy." As if that small thing was somehow the largest thing of all. Maybe it was. I've thought about that a lot since. The guard didn't acknowledge the applause. Of course he didn't. The reaction was over. He'd been a man for 90 seconds and now he went back to being a soldier. He turned, marched back toward his post and resumed his stance, rifle across his chest, eyes front, stone again, as if none of it had happened, as if he hadn't just turned a riot into a round of applause with one shot and one act of impossible gentleness. But the morning wasn't done with us. Because while we'd all been watching the boy and the soldier, the thing that had actually caused all of this, the bomb, the real one, over by the park, that was still out there. And the smoke in the sky hadn't thinned. If anything, it had spread, gone darker, and now I could hear them. Sirens. Lots of them. Coming from every direction at once, that awful layered wail of a city's whole emergency response converging on one point, and the point was half a mile north of us and getting closer. And the police cordon the guard had organized, that human wall holding the crowd at the bollards. One of the officers on it had a radio pressed to his ear, and I watched his face change. I watched it go from relief to something much, much worse. And he turned, and he found the guard at his post, and he half ran over to him and said something fast and low. I only caught 3 words of it, but 3 words were enough to put the cold right back into my stomach. "Second device, here." The guard's eyes moved again. And this time, when they swept across the crowd, across the family, across the boy still clutching his soldier, across 400 relieved and clapping people who thought the worst was over, this time I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen in any of it. For the first time that whole morning, the guard looked afraid. "Second device, here." I've gone over those words 1,000 times. What the officer meant, what the radio had told him, whether anyone really knew anything yet. In the end, it turned out to be a warning, not a fact, a call that had come in unconfirmed, the kind of thing that floods the system in the first frantic minutes after a blast when nobody knows anything and everybody fears everything. There was no second device. Not really. But standing there that morning, nobody knew that. The fear was as real as if it had been true. And the guard heard it, and his face changed. And that's the part I want to tell you about, because it's the part that taught me the most. He was afraid. I saw it. A flicker of it behind the eyes. The man had stood through a stampede and a gunshot of his own making without so much as a blink, and the word second device here put fear in him at last. Because of course they did. He was a person. He had a mother somewhere too, probably, and a Sunday roast he liked, and a life he wanted to go home to. He was not made of stone, however much the act of standing still tries to convince you he is. But here's the thing. He was afraid, and he did not move. I don't mean he stayed frozen like before. I mean the opposite. The fear came, I watched it land, and then I watched him take it and fold it up and put it somewhere, and what came out the other side was not a man running for cover. It was a man getting to work. He spoke to the officer, fast, low, both of them now reading the cordon and the crowd and the gates like a map. And then he raised that parade ground voice again, the one that had stopped 400 people dead in their tracks, except this time he didn't need a rifle shot to clear the way. This time they were listening already. This time they trusted the voice. "Listen to me," he called out, and the courtyard hushed. "I need everyone to move calmly, calmly away from the railings and out toward the mall. Follow the officers. Do not run. There is no need to run. Keep moving and keep clear. You're all going to be fine. Move." And they did. That's the thing about the second time. They did it right. The same crowd that had been a deadly stampede 10 minutes before now flowed out across the open ground in something close to order, because somebody calm had told them where to go and they believed him. The yellow-capped school group reassembled around their teacher, who was counting heads again, and this time the number came out right, and she pressed her face into her hands for 1 second before herding them along. The plastic soldier man left his suitcase where it was and just walked. The pram, the empty pram, got picked up by a stranger and wheeled to safety. I should have gone with them. The sensible thing, the safe thing, was to flow out with the rest toward the mall and away from the gates. But I didn't. I told myself it was the photographer's curse, the thing in me that moves toward the fire. Maybe it was. Or maybe I just couldn't make myself leave that family, the mother and the man and the little boy with his soldier, who were now being hurried by 2 officers toward a side gate that had swung open in the railings. And as they passed me, close, just a few feet away, I finally got my answer to the question I'd been carrying since the start of the morning. Who were they? Because as they hurried past, the man in the suit was speaking into his cuff, and I heard him say it clear as anything, the kind of phrase you don't forget. Principal and the young master are secure. Moving to the secondary point, repeat, the boy is safe. The young master. I'm not going to tell you they were anyone in particular, because I don't actually know. And I've spent enough of this story being honest with you that I'm not going to start making things up at the end. There was no name. There was no announcement. Whoever that little boy was, some quiet branch of some quiet family, somebody whose mother wore a pale blue coat that cost more than my rent, and traveled with a man whose whole job was watching the crowd. Whoever he was somebody. Somebody the system cared a great deal about keeping safe. And the strange, beautiful thing is that it didn't matter. Not in the moment. When that crowd was crushing him against the bars, he wasn't somebody. He was just a small boy who couldn't breathe. And when the guard handed his toy back through the railings, the guard didn't do it because of who the boy was. I'm certain of that. He did it because the boy was crying and his soldier had fallen down, and that's reason enough for a decent person. The grandness of the family had nothing to do with the grandness of the act. They reached the side gate. The mother stopped. She turned. And in the middle of being hurried to safety with a possible bomb somewhere in the city, she stopped and she looked back across the forecourt at the guard standing at his post, and she pressed her hand flat against her own chest over her heart and she held it there. A whole sentence in one gesture. I will never forget you. I will never be able to thank you enough. You don't even know what you did. The guard, eyes front, did not look at her. He couldn't. He was a soldier again. But I'd like to believe he saw it anyway, the way you see things at the edge of your vision, the way he'd seen the boy's toy fall in the first place. I'd like to believe it landed. And the boy, the last I saw of the boy, he was being carried now, up against the man in the suit's shoulder, and over that shoulder he was looking back too. Not waving, just looking. His soldier clutched to his chest, his face calm. And then the side gate closed behind them and they were gone, swallowed into the safe and secret machinery that exists to keep people like that safe and secret, and I never saw any of them again. The all clear came about 40 minutes later. I know that now from the news. Though at the time I only knew it from the way the energy in the streets slowly let out, like a held breath finally released. The thing in Hyde Park had been real, a device, in a bin near one of the paths. It had injured people. I won't pretend it didn't, some of them badly. But by some grace it had gone off early or wrong or in a corner where the trees took the worst of it, and nobody died. That word went around the crowds outside the cordon like water finding cracks. Nobody died, nobody died. People who'd never met held onto each other when they heard it. The second device turned out to be a phantom, a bad call, the fog of a frightening morning. There was only the one, and it had failed to do the worst of what it wanted to do. That's the official story, more or less. You can look up the rest. I'm not here to give you the news report. I'm here to tell you what I saw at the gates. And what I saw at the gates, when the all-clear finally came and the cordon eased, and a thin, strange, shaken sort of normal started creeping back into the morning, was this. The guard still at his post. He'd never left it, through all of it. He'd broken his stance to save a family and fire a shot and clear a crowd and hand back a toy, and then he had gone straight back to standing there. And he had stood there through the second device scare and the evacuation and the 40 minutes of not knowing. And now here he was in the after, still standing, rifle across his chest, eyes front, scarlet coat, black cap. as if it were just another Tuesday and nothing had happened at all. A new crowd was already gathering. That's London for you. The tourists who'd fled were trickling back, and a fresh batch who'd never been here at all were arriving with their phones up, and within an hour the whole circus would be running again as if the morning had never cracked open. Most of the new people would take their photo of the guard and never know. Never know what those hands had done. Never know that the still, silent man they were giggling at had, a little while ago, been the bravest thing any of us had ever seen. That's the part that stayed with me longest. Not the shot, not even the salute. It's that he went back to standing there, anonymous, and let the world forget. I walked up to the railings. I don't really know what I meant to do. Thank him, maybe. But you can't, can you? You can't make a king's guard talk to you. That's the whole point of them. So I just stood there for a moment a few feet from him on the public side of the bars, the way the little boy had stood. And I looked at him. Properly. The way I'd wished people would look at him at the start of the day. His eyes were front, but they were wet. I'm sure of it. Just slightly, just at the edges. A young man's gray-blue eyes staring at the middle distance, holding a whole morning behind them and not letting a single piece of it out. I lifted my camera, and then I lowered it again because some things you don't take. I just gave him a small nod he'd never see, and I said, quiet, not expecting anything, "Thank you." He didn't move. Of course he didn't. But I'll tell you what. As I turned to go, and I might have imagined this, I've made my peace with not being sure. As I turned to go, I heard very softly from a man who is not allowed to speak 4 words. Soldiers, don't stay down. I didn't turn back. I didn't want to break it. I just walked away into the strange, bright wreck of that morning, with a camera full of pictures I'd never properly be able to explain, and those 4 words going round and round in my head. That was years ago now. The photograph, the salute, the boy and the guard on either side of the bars, I sold it in the end. It ran in the papers. You might have seen it. It got called all sorts of things, the image of the year, that kind of talk. People wrote columns about it. Strangers told me it made them cry on the train. I never told most of them the full story because the full story doesn't fit in a caption, and anyway I was never sure anyone would believe the part about him going back for the toy. I tried for a while to find out who the guard was. I wanted to thank him properly. I wanted to know his name, where he was from, whether he was all right after a day like that, whether anyone had ever told him what he'd done. The army doesn't make that easy, and maybe that's right. Maybe a man like that doesn't need a journalist turning up at his door, but it nags at me. That he's out there somewhere, probably retired now, probably tending a garden or pushing his own grandchild on a swing, and he might think nobody really saw. He might think it was just a morning he got through. I saw, mate, if you ever read this, I saw all of it. And I think about the little boy, too. He'd be grown now. A teenager, more or less. I wonder if he remembers. I wonder if somewhere there's a young man who keeps a battered little wooden soldier on a shelf and can't quite explain to anyone why it matters so much. I wonder if he ever stands a bit straighter than he needs to, without knowing why. And if some part of that goes back to a morning by the gates when a giant in a red coat crouched down to his level and told him a true thing in 4 words. I started this by saying I tell the story wrong sometimes. I do. I get the order muddled. I forget which sound came first. But there's one part I have never once gotten wrong, not in all the years of telling it, and it's the part I want to leave you with. When everything went to pieces that morning, when the bomb went off and the crowd became a beast and the whole world seemed to forget itself, every single one of us ran. I ran. 400 people ran. It's what people do. It's what we're built for. One man stood. And the thing I've never been able to shake, the thing I think about on the bad days when the world feels like it's coming apart again, is that he wasn't braver than the rest of us because he felt no fear. I saw the fear land on him. I watched it arrive. He stood anyway. That's not the absence of fear. That's the whole of courage, right there in a scarlet coat, on a gray Tuesday, at the gates where the world expected nothing of him but to be a photograph. He stood his post. And then, when it was over, he bent down and picked up a child's toy off the ground and stood it back on its feet, because soldiers don't stay down. Neither do little boys. Neither, on the good days, do the rest of us. We get back up. Every time.